The introduction of the telephone box represents the democratization of communication. No longer was the use of the telephone restricted to those who could afford to rent one. A telephone was available to anyone with a few coins in their pocket. In the early years, there were many private telegraph companies, but in 1868, the Telegraph Act began the long process of drawing many of the land-based telegraph companies under the auspices of the General Post Office. The advent of the telephone did nothing to circumvent this process. It was decided to develop a national telephone kiosk with a standardized design, thereby making them recognizable as telephone kiosks. Before then, telephone kiosks had a wide range of designs. The first GPO telephone box was the kiosk number 1, or K1. It was a white box over 8 feet in height and built of concrete. It featured a red door and red framed windows and was topped by a pyramid-shaped roof. On its window panes were the words "Public Telephone" and "Open Always." They were introduced in 1921, but their design was not popular, particularly on the streets of the London metropolitan boroughs, and so a competition was launched to find a more acceptable design. This led to the iconic red telephone box, the K2. It was designed by architect Sir Giles Gilbert Scott and painted red by the GPO in order to make them easy to spot by the general public. These were of cast iron construction, 9 feet tall, and featured fluted architraves, a domed roof, and royal crowns. The K2 was an expensive telephone box to manufacture and erect, and for the most part, it remained limited to London. The K3 was an attempt to produce a telephone box which would be cheaper and more widespread. Like the K1, the K3 was built of reinforced concrete. It was painted a pale cream colour, apart from its window frames, which were red. 12,000 were erected across Great Britain, but very few have survived. In the mid-1920s, someone had the bright idea of combining the K2 telephone box with a few attributes of a post office, and so the K4 was born. Cast iron on a base of concrete, the K4 was larger than any other telephone box that had come before or since. It had a post box and 2 stamp machines. Very few K4 boxes were ever erected, however, and production of them ended in 1935. The K5 was a simplified combination of a K1 and a K2, keeping the colour scheme, the red door and window frames, the white overall paintwork, and the simple clean lines of the K1, but adding the domed roof of the K2. The K5, though, does not seem to have ever been produced in great numbers. Sir Giles Gilbert Scott returned to the world of telephone kiosks in 1935, in time for the Silver Jubilee of King George V. What he produced was the K6, the red telephone box reborn. Shorter than the K2 at 8 feet tall, it, like the K2, was cast iron and painted red. It is distinguishable from its predecessor in its window arrangement and its lack of a pediment. The K6 was the most widespread telephone box design in Great Britain before the KX100, with some 60,000 erected, and many have survived. Despite the iconic nature of the K6, By the 1950s, the GPO was looking to modernize its standard telephone kiosks and make them fit for a modern Britain. Architect Hugh Neville Conder drew up a design to be built of aluminium, to be modern. His design was smaller than the K6, had large windows, a modesty panel and frosted glass on one side. The British climate and the GPO's lack of enthusiasm for the design ensured the K7 did not reach the production stage. The GPO still sought a replacement for the K6. The K8 of the mid-1960s was looked upon as that replacement. This was of a minimalist design by Bruce Martin and was, at least, more successful than its predecessor. 11,000 were erected. It took the form of a simple red box with large windows on 3 sides built of cast iron. With the coming of the 1980s came privatization. The GPO's telephone wing became British Telecom, and in the mid-1980s, BT, as it had become known, decided to modernize its telephone boxes. The KX100 was built with an aluminium frame and stainless steel panels. Like the K7, it had a modesty panel and large windows. There was public opposition to the new design when it was introduced, opposition that only became more acute when BT ignored its potential customers' wishes by tearing down many of the pre-existing K6 boxes, although the general public recognized the need for a box the disabled could use. Many K6s became grade listed, which is why so many of them can still be seen today. The 1990s saw the introduction of the KX100 Plus, which developed from the KX100, which featured the domed roof of the K6. Parts of the new design were red, and some of the KX100 Plus boxes were for internet access, and they can still be seen on the streets today. But by the turn of the century, the mobile phone had begun to supersede the need for a telephone kiosk on the street. Communications had evolved once more, and the telephone could now be carried in a pocket. If you like this video, why not give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel anyway.